Welcome to the design studios of Plazko.com. I'm Bonnie Clewans, and today I'm going to show you how to create this illusion necklace with crystals, Biwa Pearls, soft flex, nylon coated wire, and mini crimp beads. A lot of people really don't use mini crimp beads, and they are very, very valuable in many different designs. With a mini crimp, I am able to thread it onto my soft flex wire. This is 0.019 or medium weight wire. For a project like this, I can use a variety of wires. I could use a finer wire if I chose. One of the issues is making sure that the wire is appropriate for the beads which you are using. We are using the Biwa Pearls, and they are fairly large. So in order for the wire to maintain its shape, instead of being severely tugged by the weight of the beads, I've selected the medium weight wire. How do we use crimp beads? Well, we need a chain nose pliers to squeeze that crimp bead. And if you can see, we have a crimp bead on the wire which has been crimped by our flat nose pliers, and it's very simple to do. We just squeeze it and make sure it is in place. Then I would thread my bead onto the wire and pick up one of the mini crimp beads, and as you can see, it's practically the same size as the wire, and that will help me in my design and make it very invisible when I crimp it. Squeezing onto that crimp bead, and now I am in place and my bead would not move. The other thing that I've done today is I've done a graduated necklace. I have cut 3 strands of my wire, and I've done what is known as a 1-inch drop. The longest is 18 inches, 17 inches, and 16 inches. And that allows me to have this nice drop and graduation to my necklace. If I had larger beads, I might go 1.5 inches in between. But remembering, this is a 16-inch piece of wire, making that necklace fairly short. So I don't want it to be too short and uncomfortable. Depending on the size of the person you're making your necklace for, you might have to make some corrections or additions. Let's get started. I'm going to take my longest piece of wire and for this design I've added the crystals. These are iridescent peacock pearls, and they kind of are like chameleons. They take on the color of what's next to it. I will thread on my bead and a crystal on each side. And I'm going to add on my small mini crimps. And these are really tiny. They look like grains of sand. And that's the reason I really like working with them, because you can't even see them. I'm going to squeeze one side and very gently give it a little press, and I can see that it's in place. And then squeeze my second side, and I am in place. For this design, I start with a centerpiece, and then I'm going to leave 1.5 inches between the next bead, and I like to call these stations because we have a collection of crystals and beads right there. I will pick up my ruler and measure 1.5 inches from the last crimp bead. Then I simply squeeze that crimp bead so that it is in place. Add a crystal, another bead, and sometimes you need to gently rotate your bead when you're working at getting it onto your wire. And now the final crimp bead. And now I'm ready to squeeze with my chain nose pliers. And I've got my second. Now let me repeat this on the other side. Again, I'm going to be 1.5 inches away from my last crimp bead, and squeeze and put that into place. Again, adding on my crystal, my bead, and sometimes these can be a little challenging just to see where the hole is, and very gently I rotate it and get it threaded onto my wire. Add my crystal, and my mini crimp. And once I kind of got that onto the end of my wire, go. And I crimp that last bead in place. And again, giving it a gentle tug to see that I am absolutely in place. Now I'm ready to add on my second strand. Now, one of the things you need to be aware of in this design, you want your beads to fall in between this space so that you don't have things congested. You want to keep them apart so that they fall into the right place. Okay? So what I'll do is put on my first crimp bead, and I need to make sure I am going to have my beads right in between these two stations. I've lined up the ends and I position my crimp and squeeze. Okay. And I will be repeating the same process on the second side, adding my beads, and then we'll add our last strand. We have our second strand of our illusion necklace complete, and we're ready to start the third and shortest strand. And this one only has one bead, and what we will do is the same as what we did on the first strand. We will center it, adding on crystal on each side, and picking up one mini crimp on each side, making sure we are in the middle and our both ends are even. And that looks pretty good. And now I'll just go ahead and crimp the first side. And when I crimp on the second side, I like to use gravity so that way I can get as close to my bead as possible, making sure that I don't have a lot of excess space and movement. There are some designs we can do where we do use movement and floating beads, and that will be for another project. Now I'd like to show you how to finish your project. One of the things that I look at when I look at jewelry is how is it finished? a professional finish really makes the piece look handcrafted. I like to use sterling cord crimps when I work with my wire. I have 3 strands, so I have a fairly good amount. The inner hole in here is quite small, so my 3 strands fit right inside that cord crimp. Now, as you can see, this is open. I don't want extra wire sticking out, so I just want to line things up so the end of my wire basically comes to the end of the cord crimp. To attach it, I use a crimping tool, and making sure I am absolutely where I want to be, I squeeze using the first part of that crimp tool, and I need to make sure I do get purchase on there. Then I turn the cord crimp over and squeeze on the second side, and I am attached. I will repeat on the second side, and this is a hook and eye cord crimp, which allows me to have the clasp as part of the finish. Again, squeezing and rotating it over and squeezing again, and if it's a little loose, sometimes you can be a little tentative, take it back to the first side and give it a gentle squeeze, and now we have our illusion necklace. But we are not done. Now I'd like to show you how to make this adjustable. And for many years I lived in a cold climate where I wore turtleneck sweaters, I'd say 9 months out of the year, and I always wanted my necklaces adjustable. And it's a good idea if you're making them as gifts. You never know how your recipient feels about the necklace as far as being too tight or too loose. What I do is take one of my split rings and I position it in a round nose pliers so that the open part of the split ring faces upwards. I take my T-pin, which you can find in any fabric store, and I'm going to add a 2-inch piece of chain and then thread it on to the round side of my cord crimp, and then just rotate around until I am attached. Now, a piece of chain just hanging like that isn't very attractive. So what I'll do is add a counterbalance, and that very simply are 2 crystals at the end on a head pin, adding my beads, holding the beads, positioning about 1/3 of the way up the nose of the pliers, holding on to the beads, bending away from me. Pulling that wire over the top nose of the pliers towards me. Now I hook it on to my chain and position my pliers diagonally across and start wrapping that wire around that little stem just above the beads. Picking up my flush cutter, positioning as close as I can, cutting down on the surface so that the wire doesn't fly, and then finishing by tucking in that little end using my crimping tool. And be careful not to crack your crystal. And we just get that tucked in so that the end is smooth. And now I have an adjustable necklace so that if the wearer wishes to use the chain, they can, and increase the length of the necklace. As you can see, this is a very attractive and interesting necklace, and anybody would be proud to wear it. If you have any questions about this project or any others, please contact us at DIY@Plazko.com.